The cornfields of western Kansas have a way of swallowing sound. By late summer, the stalks stand taller than a grown man, packed so tightly together that even the wind seems to lose its voice once it slips between them. From the road, the fields look calm, ordinary, endless green stretching beneath a pale Midwestern sky. But on an August afternoon in 2018, something moved through those fields that didn't belong there. And for nearly a month, no one knew it. On Friday, August 17, 2018, school had just let out for the weekend in the small town of Ridgway, Kansas, a farming community where everyone knew everyone, and nothing truly bad was ever supposed to happen. The kind of town where parents didn't panic if their kids stayed out a little too late, because danger felt like something that existed elsewhere, somewhere far away. That afternoon, Ethan Miller, 14, pulled a black hoodie over his head despite the heat. He'd always done that, comfort over common sense. His friend, Logan Pierce, 15, wore a red long-sleeve sweatshirt and basketball shorts, the sleeves pushed up past his elbows. They looked like any other teenage boy's killing time at the end of summer. They told Ethan's mother they were heading out for a bit. Just a walk. Maybe a bike ride. Maybe the convenience store on Main Street. They never came back. At first, no one was worried. When evening rolled in and the boys hadn't returned, their parents assumed the same thing most parents in Ridgway always assumed, that they'd lost track of time. Maybe they were at a friend's house. Maybe they were playing video games in someone's basement. Phones died. Curfews were flexible. This was Kansas. But as the sky darkened and porch lights began flicking on one by one, unease crept in. Calls went unanswered. Texts stayed unread. By 10:47 p.m., Ethan's mother drove the route the boys usually took, down County Road 6, past the grain elevator, along the edge of the cornfields. There was no sign of them. By midnight, panic replaced patience. The Ridgway Police Department filed 2 missing juvenile reports within minutes of each other. Officers knocked on doors. Classmates were called. Teachers were contacted. No one had seen Ethan or Logan after about 4:30 p.m. The last confirmed sighting came from a gas station clerk near the edge of town. She remembered them clearly. 2 boys. One in a black hoodie. One in a red sweatshirt. They bought sodas, laughed about something, then walked east, toward the farmland. That detail stuck, because east of Ridgway wasn't another neighborhood. It was corn. Search teams mobilized before sunrise. Volunteers lined up at the community center, some still wearing work boots, others holding flashlights and maps. The sheriff requested K-9 units from neighboring counties. Drones were deployed. Helicopters circled low over the fields. They searched ditches. They searched barns. They searched the endless green rows, pushing deeper and deeper until the stalks scraped their arms raw. Nothing. No clothing. No backpacks. No footprints that made sense. It was as if the boys had simply disappeared. By day 3, rumors took over. Some said the boys ran away. Others whispered about drugs. A few mentioned trafficking, quickly shut down by police, but never fully erased from public conversation. Investigators didn't buy the runaway theory. Ethan had left his phone charger plugged into the wall. Logan had money in his room he hadn't taken. Neither boy had packed clothes. Neither had searched escape routes or destinations online. This wasn't planned. Something had interrupted them. Police reconstructed the likely timeline. Sometime between 4:30 and 5 p.m., Ethan and Logan walked along the narrow gravel road that cut between 2 massive cornfields owned by Harlan Creek Farms, one of the largest operations in the county. There were no cameras on that road. No houses within sight. No witnesses who could say what happened next. But investigators believed the boys encountered someone. Someone with a vehicle. Someone familiar enough, or convincing enough, that two cautious teenagers didn't immediately run. The working theory was chillingly simple. They were taken. What made the case even more disturbing was how quiet it was. No screams reported. No struggle marks found along the road. No dropped shoes or torn clothing. Which raised a terrifying question. What if they hadn't fought back? What if they hadn't been able to? Toxicologists and behavioral experts were quietly consulted. Investigators floated the possibility that the boys had been incapacitated, possibly drugged. A theory that couldn't be confirmed without bodies, but couldn't be dismissed either. And then there was the corn. Search leaders admitted something they hated saying out loud. If someone wanted to hide two people in Ridgeway, there was no better place. A person could walk 10 feet into those fields and vanish completely. By the second week, national media picked up the story. 2 Kansas teens missing, vanished near cornfields. Faces appeared on TV screens across the country. Candlelight vigils were held in Ridgeway's town square. Prayer ribbons wrapped around fence posts. Parents stopped letting their kids walk anywhere alone. The town changed. Doors locked earlier. Porch lights stayed on all night. And every rustle in the corn sounded like a secret. Before we go any further, if stories like this matter to you, if you care about uncovering what happens in the quiet places no one looks twice at, subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment with your thoughts, like the video to support the investigation, and share it so these stories don't fade into silence. Because what happened next almost did. By day 18, the official search scaled back. Resources were running thin. Tips had slowed to nothing. Detectives had followed every lead. An old pickup truck, a masked figure reported miles away, a stranger seen buying rope at a hardware store, but every path ended the same way. Nowhere. Privately, some investigators feared the worst. But no one said it out loud. Not yet. Then, on the morning of September 21st, a farmhand named Caleb Rourke drove his ATV out to inspect a section of corn that had been damaged by animals. What he saw made him stop breathing. At first, he thought it was a prank. 2 scarecrows stood at the edge of the field, facing the road. One wore a black hoodie. The other, a red long-sleeve sweatshirt. Their clothes were filthy, twisted, as if they'd been dragged through dirt and fought against it. And then, one of them moved. Caleb dropped his radio. Because those weren't scarecrows. They were boys. Alive. Tied upright. And wearing masks. Caleb Rourke stood frozen at the edge of the cornfield, the ATV idling beneath him, its low hum the only sound cutting through the morning air. The figures didn't move again. That almost made it worse. They were positioned carefully, too carefully, arms stretched outward, wrists bound to wooden crossbeams. Their feet barely touched the ground, tied at the ankles to vertical posts driven deep into the soil. Burlap sacks covered their heads, tied tight around their necks with coarse twine. Scarecrows. Except scarecrows don't breathe. Caleb fumbled for his radio with shaking hands and barely managed to get the words out. There's 2 kids out here. I think they're alive. First responders arrived within minutes, sirens slicing through the silence of the farmland. Deputies ran the last stretch on foot, weapons drawn, eyes scanning the endless rows of corn for movement. They didn't know if whoever had done this was still nearby. They didn't know if this was a trap. When they reached the boys, one of the deputies immediately cut the twine from Ethan's wrists. The black hoodie, once clean, now stained with dirt and dried mud, slid down his arms as he collapsed forward. Logan followed seconds later. Both boys crumpled to the ground like they'd been holding themselves upright through sheer will alone. When the burlap masks were removed, gasps rippled through the group. Their faces were pale, lips cracked, eyes glassy, unfocused, but they were alive. Paramedics worked fast. Dehydration, severe muscle strain, rope burns around wrists and ankles, bruising along their ribs and shoulders, and something else. Both boys showed signs of prolonged disorientation, confusion that went beyond fear and exhaustion. When asked basic questions, they struggled to answer. Names came slowly. Dates didn't come at all. It was as if time had been removed. The field was immediately sealed off. Crime scene tape cut across acres of farmland as investigators began documenting everything. The wooden posts weren't farm equipment. They'd been freshly cut, likely from nearby trees. The crossbeams were bolted together with hardware store materials. This wasn't impulsive. Someone had planned it. Detectives focused on the clothing. Ethan's black hoodie had small tears along the sleeves. Logan's red sweatshirt was smeared with dried blood near the cuff. Their shorts were caked with dirt, grass, and something darker, possibly oil or fertilizer. Signs of a struggle. But not the kind that happened at the roadside. The kind that happened later. At the hospital, doctors ran toxicology screens. When the preliminary results came back, the room went quiet. Both boys had traces of sedative compounds in their systems, low levels, partially metabolized, but unmistakable. The type sometimes used to induce sleep or confusion. Not something you'd find accidentally. Not something teenagers would normally have access to. The implication was chilling. They hadn't gone willingly. They hadn't even been fully conscious. When detectives attempted formal interviews, they were careful, gentle, patient, slow. What Ethan and Logan could remember came in fragments. Bright sunlight. A voice calling out to them from a vehicle. The sound of a door sliding open. They both remembered a smell. Sweet. Chemical. Overpowering. After that, nothing. The next memory either of them had was waking up in darkness. Hands bound. Mouths covered. Unable to tell if minutes or days had passed. They didn't know where they were. They didn't know how long they'd been gone. And they never saw a face. That detail haunted investigators. The boys were certain about one thing. The person or people who had taken them always wore masks. Not burlap like the ones used in the field. Something tighter, darker, closer to the face. The voice was muffled, unidentifiable. Sometimes calm, sometimes angry, and always anonymous. According to Ethan, the first time he realized they were outside again was when he felt wind on his skin. He remembered being dragged, his shoes catching on dirt, his arms straining against the ropes. Logan remembered trying to fight, trying to kick, trying to scream. That was when things escalated. They were forced upright, tied again, left standing. One of them remembered laughter. Not loud, not manic, just amused. The realization hit detectives hard. The Scarecrow positioning wasn't just symbolic. It was deliberate humiliation. A message. News of the discovery exploded across the country. Kansas teens found alive after a month, tied as scarecrows. But relief quickly gave way to horror as more details emerged. Where had they been for 4 weeks? Why were they returned alive? And why like this? Search records were re-examined. This field had been checked, briefly, early in the investigation. At the time, the Scarecrows hadn't been there, which meant whoever did this brought the boys back. Recently, close enough to watch the reaction. Investigators canvassed nearby roads again, this time with a sharper lens. Who had access to sedatives? Who worked late hours near the fields? Who had been following the case too closely? Farmhands were interviewed. Truck drivers. Temporary workers. Locals with prior offenses. Nothing stuck. One detail stood out. A witness from a neighboring town reported seeing a vehicle parked along the edge of Harlan Creek Farms the night before the boys were found. The driver was wearing a mask, but the witness couldn't describe the vehicle, couldn't remember the license plate, couldn't even say for sure if it was a man or a woman. The masks worked perfectly. Despite intensive efforts, weeks passed with no arrest. Ethan and Logan recovered physically, but the psychological damage lingered. Both suffered nightmares. Both avoided open fields. Both refused to talk publicly about what they'd endured. And both admitted something that unsettled even seasoned detectives. They believed the person who took them wanted them to survive. Wanted them found. Why? That question kept investigators awake at night. Because if this was about power, if this was about control, then the story wasn't over. And just when the case threatened to go cold, a single piece of evidence, overlooked in the dirt beneath the Scarecrow posts, was finally sent to the lab. What it revealed would shift the entire investigation, and suggest that the boys hadn't been the first. The evidence was so small that it almost disappeared into the dirt. It clung to the base of one of the wooden posts, the one Ethan had been tied to, pressed deep into the churned soil where boots and bare feet had struggled weeks earlier. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than debris carried in by farm equipment. But one crime scene technician hesitated, then bagged it. It was a fragment of synthetic fabric, no larger than a postage stamp. Dark. Flexible. Not burlap. Not cotton. Lab tests confirmed what investigators had feared. The fibers matched material commonly used in industrial-grade face coverings, the kind worn for chemical handling, farming applications, or personal concealment. Not something easily traced to a single manufacturer, but distinctive enough to raise alarms. The mask wasn't improvised. It was intentional. That discovery reframed everything. The Scarecrows weren't a moment of madness. The masks weren't an afterthought. The sedation wasn't accidental. This was someone methodical. Someone who understood how to move unseen. Investigators went back further. Much further. They began quietly reviewing old reports, incidents that hadn't seemed connected at the time. Strange encounters near rural roads. Teens reporting dizziness after brief interactions with strangers. Livestock workers recalling figures standing in fields at night, motionless, watching. At first, none of it seemed solid. But then patterns emerged. Not abductions. Attempts. A 2014 report from southern Nebraska. A 2016 incident in eastern Colorado. A 2017 call in western Kansas. Each involved young teens. Each near farmland. Each with vague memories of masked individuals. None had resulted in disappearances. Until Ethan and Logan. The idea was horrifying. What if this wasn't escalation, but rehearsal? Detectives expanded their suspect pool beyond Ridgeway. They looked at seasonal workers, migrant laborers, long-haul drivers, people who moved often, stayed anonymous, blended in. But every trail went cold. The masks erased faces. The sedatives erased timelines. The fields erased witnesses. One final interview with Ethan and Logan offered something unsettling. Both boys independently said the same thing. They believed they had been watched for days before they were found. They remembered hearing footsteps at night, hearing corn stalks shift unnaturally, sensing someone standing just out of sight, not interacting, observing. And then, suddenly, silence. Psychologists suggested the possibility of trauma-induced perception, but investigators weren't convinced, because something else happened. 3 days after the boys were discovered, a local farmer reported a new scarecrow standing at the edge of his field. This one wore no clothes, just a mask. When deputies arrived, it was gone. The case never officially closed. No arrest was made. No suspect publicly named. No motive confirmed. Ethan and Logan eventually returned to school, though neither stayed in Ridgeway long after. Their families moved. Quietly. Without announcements. The town of Ridgeway still plants corn every year. Still harvests in late summer. Still avoids certain fields. To this day, investigators debate the same questions. Was the act meant to terrify or to prove control? Was returning the boys alive an act of restraint or arrogance? And most chilling of all, was the person satisfied? Because sometimes the most disturbing crimes aren't the ones that end in death. They're the ones that end in survival. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to the channel for more deep-dive true crime investigations. Like the video to support the work. Comment with your thoughts. What do you think the message was? And share this story, because silence is exactly what people like this depend on.